how to build a learning content strategy from scratch. So hoping today you should have some really practical examples you can take away to actually do some of this stuff yourselves. We're actually going to start off with a simple question, a little poll. And the question we're going to ask is, do you already have a learning content strategy? Oh, Kat has put it up on screen already, that's great. So you should see a poll appearing on the screen now. So if you can answer the question, and then we can see what sort of answers we get out of this. I'm going to have to answer this myself, I think. Okay, Kat, are those answers coming in?
Yes, they're coming in. Can you see the percentages, Daniel? Do you want me to read them out to you? I think a few more are still voting.
Sorry.
Okay, no. Absolutely fine. So it's looking like, yes, absolutely is about 14%. Those who sort of had a strategy in place is 53%. Those who have planned one but never actually stuck to it is 11%. And those not at all is 24%. That's just jumped up a little bit now. If I share the results, you should all be able to see that. Can you see that?
Yeah, I can see it. That's absolutely perfect. Great. Oh, really interesting to see the majority is sort of. So hopefully there's some interesting stuff from today's talk that we'll be able to take away. I also like the planned one but never stuck to it. That's definitely something I've seen in the past myself as well. Okay, that's really useful just to get a gauge on how aware you guys are of content strategies in general. Brilliant, thank you. Right, so what I wanted to start with is just a little bit around the trends that we're seeing in L&D from our clients, and also why you might want to embark on a content strategy, I guess. So these are just some things that we're starting to see from clients and what people are saying they want in their organizations. And if you're here today, it might well be that you've already thought about these things. Maybe something's missing from your learning culture and you want to address it. And it could be that you're thinking about some of the ideas, or maybe implementing a new solution. And you might already know how important this is as an opportunity to shift your culture, like where learners can and will develop themselves to constantly add some value to organization. However, it's important to remember that these things don't just happen. I think a really classic thing is when we want to do these things, we tend to introduce technology, new solutions, and just kind of assume that it's going to do it for us. But that's just not gonna work. Obviously, people are very important; they have to be involved as well, and content is a really big part of that as well. So you do need to have some sort of content strategy to help align with the technology. And by doing this, you need to provide some tools and environment to support your users. So that's searchability, organizing your content, and all things like that. So I'm going to move on to why specifically you need a content strategy. So asking your learners to be in charge of what they learn is all well and good. So that's self-directed learning stuff on the previous slide. But that means providing them with a lot of learning they can actually find, right? You want to provide opportunity for just-in-time learning, but people to sort of find stuff. So essentially what you're trying to do really is create an internal Google. And that's a really, really complex thing to do, which is one reason why a content strategy can really help. I always say to think of your learning platform a bit like a wardrobe. So imagine you've got a very impressive walk-in wardrobe with strip lighting and really fancy drawers and things like that. But ultimately, a wardrobe is completely useless if you haven't got any clothes to put in it, and clothes being the content. And by having a content strategy, what you're aiming to get closer towards is guaranteeing that you could answer, and by you I mean the learning team / your platform, can answer any question, any potential question your end users may have. And having a content strategy also means attacking your problem systematically, identifying what you've got, what you can find, and what you need to create. And most importantly, it's about doing this on a continuous basis as well. So for us at Thrive, content strategy is a really big part of our onboarding process, but it's also something you should be revisiting continuously because it will change and evolve over time. And the good news is, your organization, you already have the tools to do this and the means to do this, to sort of populate your internal Google. You just need to learn how to harness them. And hopefully there's some key things you can take away from today. So I'm going to look at where you start. So, okay, say you've got absolutely nothing, no idea how to create a content strategy. This is why we're doing it from scratch, hence the name of the webinar. And what our aim is here is to get to a point where all your knowledge in your entire organization is captured. And that sounds really, really daunting, but here are some really simple steps that you can take to do this. In simple terms, what you're going to be doing here is creating a content map, which is really just a very big spreadsheet or several spreadsheets. So you can understand everything you have and where your gaps might be. So you look at what you already have, which is probably quite a lot of stuff. You might find that a lot of it is terrible. And you might also find that you've got more stuff than you realise. I quite often work with clients and say, what do you currently have? And they say, well, nothing. But it's because maybe they're thinking about specifically learning content, not just content in general. What can you find? This is just about how there's so much good content out there that you can reuse, and then what you need to create, what are the gaps. So these are the things I'm going to be talking through today, really. So let's start with working out what you already have. So this is an exercise that I'll go through with all our clients, so we'll go through with all our clients here at Thrive. And this process, back to my wardrobe analogy, is a bit like having a spring clean out of your wardrobe. So when I do a big clear out of my wardrobe, I tend to get everything out and just spread it all over the floor in an absolute pile of mess, and then I start to divide it into piles. So stuff to give away, stuff to fix, stuff to try on again. And this is essentially what you're trying to do with content. This phase is very much about just work out what you have. And you might also find that you've got some stuff that's, you know, hidden at the back of the wardrobe that you completely forgot about. And if you dust it off a bit, it can actually be really great again. So back to what I was saying earlier about, you might realise there's actually more stuff than you thought there was initially. So here's some ideas about where you should look for existing content. So as I said, you probably have more than you think, and don't just look for learning content. Like, learning really is anything that an end user wants to know. So that could be, how do I book annual leave? How can I be more productive? Like, your goal here is not to differentiate between stuff that's more operational and stuff that's more learning. It's just to get it all out and get it into a big list. So gather FAQs from around the business, or if you haven't got any, then quickly ask around your team what questions they often get asked, or ask themselves, or questions they had when they were a new starter. That's always a really good one. Say, like, when you first started, what did you want to know? And just take notes of those questions. FAQs are a really simple way to get a picture of what you have. Systems training, great one as well. You probably got lots of how-tos lying around, or if you don't, if they're not homegrown ones, you might also have ones from external providers. So, you know, if you're using Skype as a tool, or MS Teams, it's probably better example at the moment, they already have a bunch of videos online to how to use MS Teams. So it's just a case of cataloguing those and knowing you have those as a resource. And spend some time looking at your face-to-face sessions as well. There'll be loads of stuff, like knowledge-based parts of those, that you can extract out. That could be slides, handouts, etc. So just pull it all out and stick it into a big spreadsheet to look at what you currently have. And then following this, what you can do is look at what you have any good. So chances are you found quite a lot of stuff, hopefully. So then you need to look at each piece and think, well, actually, is this useful? Is this still relevant, etc. Back to our clothes analogy, this is really a health check on every item. So if it was clothes, it would be, does it still fit me? Do I still like it? Does it have a hole in it? Is it out of style now? Those are the sort of things you're thinking when you're picking those things up. In content terms, though, just to make it a bit more relevant, then that's things like, is it too long? So our research shows that anything over 2 minutes, from videos, things like that, or any sort of e-learning, you really see a drop off in attention, so bear that in mind. But actually, sometimes it's not just about length, it's actually about being specific. So when we work with our clients, we tend to suggest that they focus on the concepts and not the length. So each piece of content, ideally, you should be trying to focus on one concept at a time. And a really good rule of thumb is, think about the user doing the searching. Back to what I said earlier about trying to create this internal Google. If I'm trying to search something on your LXP or your LMS or what have you, you need to think about what it is. What is those search terms that I'm putting in? And is it going to correlate to that specific piece of content that I want to find? Can it stand by itself, or does it need to be paired with other things? And a lot of the creation you can do later on, this phase could just be about actually breaking things down into smaller concepts. Is it out of date? That's a nice easy one. So you'll likely have content which is just out of date, in which case it needs to go into your create pile to be updated, or maybe even removed. Will people be able to find it? So this is more around naming and tagging. Is it obvious to the user what the questions will be answered by consuming the content? And again, think about how they're gonna search for things. It's really, really important to think about, okay, am I asking myself, for example, what's the difference between coaching and mentoring? That's like a classic question that comes up in lots of training things. And that's something someone might essentially Google. But if that's buried in a piece of content called Introduction to Coaching, they're never going to find the answer to that question. So it's about breaking things down to that small level of detail. And finally, is it user-friendly format? Now, this is a hard one as it's really subjective. And really what we want here is something engaging, but most importantly, useful. So things that can help you identify if something you've already got is useful are things like engagement stats. So maybe it's got lots of views on your LXP, or lots of recent visits, or likes, or ratings, or if you have anything like that you can work, that's really handy. And obviously compliance training doesn't count here because people are told to do that. If you don't have this, then what did you think of it? Like, look at your content and think, did you learn something from it? Can you remember it 10 minutes later? Can you remember what is said? Is it up to the same standard as your favorite YouTube clips? That's always a good one as well to ask yourselves, or ultimately ask other people. And if that can be the target audience, then that's great. It's a bit like trying something on. So if you've got that dress that's a bit out of style, you're not sure about it, and you put it on, you know, you go downstairs and you show your partner, husband, wife, family, what have you, so what do you think? You know, have a chat about it. So it's about going through all your content and then working out actually what's worth keeping and what's not. My advice is to be ruthless. If you start hoarding things or thinking, oh, maybe I'll wear it one day, or what if I go to a 1950s tea party and maybe I need it then you should probably get rid of it. You're probably never going to use it. You don't want clutter in your life, and you don't want clutter in your learning platform. So you think very Marie Kondo about this and actually be very ruthless with your content, and don't keep things just for the sake of it, because it's not going to ultimately help users. It's just going to create noise. My other piece of advice on this one is that this might be a bit daunting to do at once. So if you can pick an area at a time, you know, jeans first, then t-shirts, etc., that can really help. So, for example, you might say, all right, I'm going to focus just on leadership content first, or sales content, or onboarding content. And that can be a nice way to approach your content maps as well. And I want to take a bit of time to talk about, specifically, training manuals. I think every organisation has a few of these, those really, really long training manuals that never really get used. And it's a real shame because they actually have quite a lot of valuable information in them. And I think when you're looking at a training manual, it's really important to start to break it down. So you sort of get your pencils out, look at it, and start breaking down into those concepts. And then once you've done that, you can then think about the format. So, you know, an 800-word explanation of the company values is not going to be as impactful as a video from your CEO. So there's things like that. So what sort of content is it, and what sort of format would then suit it? And things like, if it's a video from your CEO, if it was about your company values, you could jazz it up and put it to music, or you could convince them to record a message on the phone, just post it nice and natural. Like, there's lots of different things you can do around that. So think about the format. And also, just remember that you don't need to make everything yourselves. In some cases, it's so much quicker and easier to find the person who does know and make it with them, to divide and conquer. But training manuals are a really good way to start. You might end up with, you think you've got 4 pieces of content because you've got 4 training manuals, but actually you've got 400 pieces of content because you've actually gone and broken that down. So that's very much about have. And now we're going to look at find. So there's plenty of learning content out there that someone in the world's already created and spent so long making it look cool and interesting, so you don't have to. So please, 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 like, do research and look into these sorts of sites, because there is so much stuff out there you can use, and it saves you so much time. Some organizations I know that have things like user guides for Excel that they've spent ages putting together, these huge PDFs to how to use Excel. But there's already a bunch of amazing guides on YouTube or on channels like GCF Learn Free, which is a great channel, by the way. So why not just use those? I think it's one of these things that we get into naturally as human beings, where we feel the need to create everything from scratch, but actually we really, really don't. So always give things a Google first, in case, particularly around sort of softer skills, like leadership, mental health, and that sort of thing. There is so much great content out there that you could use. Another example, you could invest tons of money and time creating a bespoke guide to leadership in your organization, or you could just go on TED and find some amazing stuff they've already got on there. There's some really brilliant stuff, and obviously you can always pair it with stuff which is more specific to your organization as well. And if the content is a bit too hard to find, then there's always the option of an off-the-shelf provider as well, that can do the legwork for you. So it might be that, okay, it's a bit more specific than just online content, but actually it's not specific enough to be bespoke, so maybe you've got that as middle ground. And then you can add those to your content map as well. And that is just the content that you create yourselves. Remember, you might also be lucky enough to have auto curation tools like we have in our LXP. So these are some people that we integrate with an LXP to automatically pull in content for you. And these are great because you can set them up to subscribe to different topics and channels, and you can pull in content automatically without having to actually go and essentially Google stuff, look at it, find it, and that sort of thing. So that's really, really nice tools to use. If you have those, then you're very fortunate that you can actually use those. And the great thing about auto curation tools is that, yes, they'll absolutely help you at the beginning when you're pulling in that content, but also going back to my very early point around continuous content strategy, your auto curation tools will continuously curate for you. So they'll always be dropping in fresh new content to your site all the time. Which means that your content strategy, or part of it at least, will be, well, these tools are going to find stuff for us and we don't have to do anything, which is excellent. You don't have to vet it, you don't have to check it because it's all checked for you, and you can just let it drip feed into your site. But sometimes, of course, within your organization, you won't find everything online, and that's where creating your own does come in. So the third element is the create section. So we know what we've got. We know what we've got which is good, which can just stay. We know what we've got which is not so good, needs to be translated, shall we say. We know what we can find for the more general stuff. And then you've got this bucket of what do we then need to create. So create will cover completely new stuff, but also it'll be that stuff that you identified you want to update from the have section. And once you've identified all the titles of your content, here are some things to think about. So we want those titles, again, to be very, very bite-sized, very, very small and unique, one content at a time. So what's the best format? Like e-learning, it can be very useful, but there are very many reasons why YouTube is a platform that doesn't host SCORM packages, right? So I think don't always just jump to what you're used to and what feels natural for you. Do like push yourselves to try new formats. You've got all things like obviously videos, graphics, questions, blogs, quizzes. There's so many free tools out there to help you create this content that are all completely available online for free, possibly on your phone as well, which is another great tool you can use. I think people forget you've got your phone in your pocket all the time. So you could actually be creating content on your commute to work if you're really into it. Do you need to create it yourself? So I'd say don't do more than you have to, and remember that you might not be the expert. So can you delegate some areas of the business? For example, if you know that you need some content created around the sales process, don't try and work out what that looks like yourselves. Instead, work with someone in the sales team and ask them, what does a new starter need to know about sales process? Or ideally, if you can do this with someone who's recently joined, that's a really great thing to do as well. You get some really good insight that way. So some of our clients we work with at the content mapping stage will actually just identify big buckets of areas that they need content for, and they won't necessarily then break that down to individual titles. They'll give that to different departments to then look at, because they obviously are the experts in the area. And also, can you get your end users to create it? So sometimes the simplest way to make content is to get your phone out and literally chase people around the office. I've done that myself before. So if you know someone who can answer the questions you have on your spreadsheet, then just get 30 minutes in a room or over Zoom and interview them and cut it down. Just in the same way that you'd find information if you're asking for yourself, like in the office, it really can be that simple. And so look at what you've got on your map and think, actually, I know someone who knows that. I'm going to go and track them down and ask them with my phone, video them, or even write it down and put it in an infographic or whatever you want to do with it. But I guess the question is, what if you want something a bit fancier? So bear in mind that what I'm talking about here is like 90% of your content creation. It should be quick, easy, authentic, and simple. However, it's likely there's about 10% or so, where you might want to do something fancier. So you might want to spend more time making a lovely animation, or you might want to make something a bit slicker, particularly something you're going to use to market an idea, or like a hearts and minds piece. Those pieces I tend to find people want to spend a bit more time on, and that's something that Emma's going to cover with you a little bit later, as that slightly fancier content. But at this stage, you should really be focusing on just what the content's called, what format it should be, who's going to create it, who the expert is, and who will star in it. Now, interestingly, that's often three completely separate people. So the creator, the expert, and the star. And I'm going to explain that in a second. So DIY content, and this is where I'm going to explain a little bit about user-generated content, but also why those three people might be different. So picture a student in a classroom, and perhaps there's a very, very enthusiastic but unnecessarily long-winded teacher in front of them. So they're really keen, but they're not really explaining themselves very well. Maybe they like the subject a bit too much. And the student is listening, but just a bit, and they might need some clarification. Now, if they're a bit stuck and they want to get some clarification, is that student going to raise their hand and ask the enthusiastic but long-winded teacher for clarification? They're not. The teacher is the one that confused them in the first place, so they're not going to ask them. What they will do, though, is they'll turn to the person sat next to them and say, what did he say? What did she say? And the person they ask will put the answer in the language the student will understand, in their own terms and their own references. And you find that you do this all the time. If you sort of miss what someone says in the meeting, or have you turn to someone and say, what did they say? And or afterwards, when you're having a tea break, it's like you don't understand in the meeting, you might ask someone like, oh, I don't understand that, can you explain to me, because I was too embarrassed to ask. I know I've done that before as well. And you'll notice that just the nature of someone actually putting it into a different language, or into your own language and your own references, can be really, really powerful. And this is why this is really important for authenticity. And what I find is that if you can get an expert to explain a concept to someone in the target audience, and then have that person star on the video, or whatever content type you've chosen, the message will get across so much better. So if you want someone to learn about the, I don't know, the sales process, let's say, by all means, get your head of sales, whoever designed the process, to explain it to a salesperson, and then get the salesperson to actually create the video, or be the person who's starring on the video, whatever it might be. And just by having that little layer of translation, you can create really, really nice content that people actually understand and get a lot better. Right. And also, I think on this, I wanted to just mention is not to, if you're great at graphic design, if you're a great videographer, if you're great at animation, that's amazing. That's great. But really, the good news is it doesn't really matter. So you need to think here about the hours and hours of conversational, scrappy and unpolished video and audio that we consume every day as like just normal people, whether that be through YouTube or podcasts. And podcasts are a great example. They're so scrappy and natural and normal. And, we don't expect anything less. We're so used to this. So your goal here really is to create the piece of content that the users are interested in finding, not necessarily the perfectly polished piece of content that you think they want. And a user's interest is not determined by the lighting, how expensive the camera is. It's determined by speaking completely directly to the thing they want to learn in your own language and own voice. So my advice here is no phone voices. As soon as you have a phone voice, people just disconnect really, really quickly. So before we get into a bit more detail around user-generated content, I just wanted to ask another poll and just see who actually uses user-generated content. Oh, I can see Cassie's put it up. Thank you, Cassie. I'm going to answer it as well. And Cass, just to remind you, I can't see the responses.
Yes, that's absolutely fine. So everyone's voting away. So the majority at the moment at around 55 to 60% are no, but are thinking about it. There's about 23% who are sort of, but they want to do more. And there's 19% of people totally embracing it at the moment. So I would say the majority aren't, but are definitely thinking about and open to it. And there's 3%, I think, who are saying no, it's not for them. So just a couple more seconds to let people vote, and then I will end the poll and show you the results. Okay. So hopefully you can see the results there.
Oh, brilliant. Great.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you. So congratulations to everyone who's totally embracing it. Well done. That's excellent to see. And even the sort ofs as well. And thinking about it. So that's a really impressive percentage actually. It's a really huge amount above at least the thinking about it. So the last thing I wanted to show you really was, oh, sorry, just changed my slide. It's just some stats around UGC. I guess for any of you who are a little bit unsure about it still, here's some statistics that I came across just to highlight how powerful UGC can be. Like, UGC is the language of the modern internet. It's what we expect, it's what we want as consumers, and it's how we learn. Like, this is just our day-to-day now. And we don't really trust brands anymore. So the more polished something is, the less likely we are to believe it. So you said earlier about the phone voice, making things all polished and look all slick and stuff. People just disengage from that. If you think about your own experiences, you know, when you go to an Amazon page, do you read the fancy product description that the brand put together about how amazing the product is, or do you go straight to the user reviews? I know I always go straight to the user reviews. Even when it comes to things like shopping for clothes, sorry, I'm talking about clothes a lot in this webinar, aren't I? When it comes to shopping for clothes on things like ASOS, you know, I look at the photos they put up and I think, well, this is a very, well, it's a model who's designed to look good in clothes. It's really good lighting, etc. If there's any photos from actual people, I always look at those first because they're so much better to sort of get an idea of what they're actually like. So as consumers, we just don't trust brands. And remember that your L&D team and your organization are essentially a brand. So if you're putting content out from your central team, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that and people are going to disconnect, but if it is that polished content, people are going to be suspicious of it. Whereas from an end user, someone they know in particular or someone they can relate to, it's just so much more powerful. And not to mention as well, just from a practical standpoint, the people in the organization have a huge percentage of the information that you already need in their head. So it's just a matter of capturing it. So it really does save you a job if you can work with end user content as well. So to summarize on content creation, bear in mind some things that you're creating content. So specific, not short, as said. Just think about the user, think about what they're searching for. If you can embrace these generative content, that's amazing. If you can let go and actually allow people to do that, it can be really, really helpful. People can also get some real value out of just feeling good about themselves by creating their own content. And that can lead on to knowledge diamonds as well. You will have absolute experts in the business. Everyone does, obviously. So it's a case of finding those out. I tend to always ask people, like, who do you go to for help for each team? Each team's got like someone who's been there for quite a long time normally, who's just the absolute fountain of knowledge. So find those people. Make sure you use free tools. We actually do have a list of free tools which cover things like graphics and video and animation and writing, which we can send out to people if anyone's interested in that. Those scripts is a nice bit of advice as well. When you're creating videos in particular, like, you know, whoever you're filming knows their stuff. You don't need to plan it. As soon as you write a script, it will be weird and it will be stilted, and it will also take way longer as well. There's a reason that TV presenters make a lot of money. It's a real skill. So imagine if you ask someone a question in the office, they're not going to write a script before they answer you. They're going to just talk normally. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to they're going to and they're going to chat. So that is what we need, is that really authenticity around your content. And as I said earlier, if you can pair experts alongside real people, that can be really powerful as well. So finally from me, what I've talked about a lot so far is breaking up your content so it makes it very search friendly, makes it easier for people to consume it and to find it very quickly. And that's a really important principle to understand. So, you know, one person might want to learn French, another person might just want to be able to ask, where's the bathroom in French? So you need to think about those user needs. However, we do need to cater to those people who want to learn French as well. So we do need to also think about, yes, okay, we've broken this down to all this bite-sized content, that's great, everyone can find stuff, we've got our Google, but then we do need to think about how we can pull that together into slightly more complex programs or pathways so people can actually achieve a goal like learning French, for example. So when that's the case, you need a slightly more coherent approach and think about how those things piece together. And that's where I'm going to pass over to my colleague Emma, who'll be talking you through a little bit around that, and also what to do if you want to make, in my words, fancier content.
Thanks, Danny. So yeah, really, I wanted to talk to you about and you know, everyone knows it's a complex and sensitive subject, and something that's, you know, on most people's radar, and that they know they need to provide for their learners. So where would you start trying to fill a gap like that? Well, it's quite common, and probably, dare I say, a lot easier to kind of look at what already exists. So you know, either mirror or borrow from it, and that does have a place, as Danny talked about, with, you know, finding good content. But the danger with something like mental health is that we might keep regurgitating the same ideas, even though our understanding and experiences of mental health are something that is evolving. So it's not to say that that's the wrong approach, so that we have something to sort of guide us and to judge any piece of content against. So at Thrive, inspired by the simplicity of Kathy Moore's action.
Sorry, Emma, can I interrupt quickly?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, you keep cutting out for me, so I wasn't sure if you were asking to move on to the next slide.
Oh no, I think Emma's having some connection problems. Sorry everyone. I think you're back now, Em.
Yeah,
Look, how it's me, or if it was me or Em, I couldn't work it out.
Yeah, because I can't see the slides now, so I don't know if it's me or Danny.
Maybe turn your camera off to get a better bandwidth.
Yeah.
Try that and then see. I think the last thing we were talking about, you were still on your first slide, and you were talking a little bit about using mental health as an example of filling a content gap. So maybe start from that beginning bit. Sorry everyone on the line. I think that's probably better.
I'll share my screen again now, Em.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. And we can hear you okay. Yeah.
Okay,
perfect.
great. We'll see how it goes without video then.
Thanks everyone.
Okay, I'll take a step back just in case anyone missed anything. So I was sort of saying that, you know, finding, curating content is really good, but one thing you should do first when you're talking about filling one of these more meaty gaps is to kind of take a step back and say, what does good mental health content look like overall, and how would we define it as being successful, just so that you have something to sort of guide you and to judge any content that you do create against that. So inspired by the simplicity of Kathy Moore's action mapping model, at Thrive, we seek to define a goal for the content and Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now, but you did cut out. When you started on the slides, you cut out. I couldn't hear you anymore. Can you hear us, Cass?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, you cut out again. You might maybe go back to the first slide. I don't know if there's anything you could do about being in a better spot in the room that you're in, maybe.
I can try. Yeah, sorry guys. I've actually moved location to be with a better internet today, and it's obviously not worked out.
It happens to the best of us.
These things happen. We're all working from home. I'm sure everyone understands. Sorry, everyone. Give us a couple of minutes. See if Em can find a better spot, and if not, we'll give it one more go, Emma. And if the connection's still not there, we can talk about what we're going to do. Hi everyone, just to keep you in the loop, Emma's going to try one more time, and then if the connection's still a bit broken, I think Danny's going to take over from Emma. Is that okay, Em?
Yeah, that's completely fine. I'm so sorry.
Okay. No worries. These things absolutely happen. Sorry everyone, that's the problem with going live. But yeah, Danny will take over if it happens again. So sorry for the delay in that. Go ahead, Em.
Okay, I'll give it another go. So defining a goal, it all seems pretty straightforward in principle, but how do we practically do that? Well, at Thrive, we kind of look to the marketer's toolkit. So techniques like empathy mapping, for example, can really help you to understand your learners and can be that sort of first step in figuring out what the content should actually achieve for them. So what do they say, think, do, feel, etc. And at Thrive, this is a group exercise where the aim is to come up with a list of statements that characterize learners and then reduce this to a single statement to capture what you want to change, which is the goal. Is everyone still able to hear me okay?
I can indeed. You're still good.
Oh.
Absolutely, all good.
Oh, great. Okay, this is a good sign. We might be over it then. So, for example, the statements these statements that capture how people are feeling and thinking and doing, they might range from something like skepticism or ignorance at one end of the spectrum of mental health. So, they know nothing about it. They don't really, perhaps they're not engaged with it or realise that it affects them, compared to the opposite end of the spectrum, which might be like feelings of people being quite enlightened or self-aware of the mental health and they have nothing to learn. So is there a sentiment that captures all of these perspectives? Well, how about something like create a more positive atmosphere around mental health? And it might sound a bit wishy-washy, but we can break it down into something more practical. So this is traditionally where we might look to set objectives, perhaps. So capture a set of statements characterized by Bloom's taxonomy. So something like, can your learners list the ways that OCD might affect someone, or explain why mental health could affect performance at work, or describe how people with anxiety might feel? Well, that's all well and good, but it's not actually reflective of how people operate in the real world. For example, if you were concerned about someone at work, let's say you're a manager and you've noticed some behaviour in someone that you're a bit concerned about, if you just walked over and started...
Oh, she's gone again for me.
Yeah, I think she's dropped out, Danny. I don't know if you want to give it a go taking over.
Yeah, I can pick up. I mean, that was quite a bad time to drop off that example. I think what I was saying is that if you were in that situation at work, you're not going to necessarily walk over to someone and describe the symptoms of OCD to them. That would be really, really insensitive. So I want to look at what we'd actually recommend instead. Oh, I have to drive. I'm driving some screens. I can see Emma's notes as well. So an alternative to doing that, so that more sort of skills-based approach, this is more of a behaviours approach and look at the behaviours that you actually want to change. And you can see straight off the bat that although we're working towards the same outcomes, the behaviours will often look quite different to different people as well. So they're very personalised and the measure is only relative to you. So you're looking at sort of, this is said you got more conscious or better or increased. So you're looking at actually on an individual level, like how are you actually changing your behaviour based on what you were like before. And you're not only focusing on knowledge transfer, so instead you're thinking about the skills, confidence, mindset that you can instill amongst all your teams to help them get specifically what they need out of the content. So you're assuming sort of some intelligence here and giving people a toolkit to help them figure out their own mental health and support and to support people around them in an appropriate way. So it's not necessarily being so prescriptive. You're actually trying to give them this like collection of stuff they can use. And in doing so, you might find that, like us, you'll have the energy and the freedom to be more creative and more innovative with what you actually make. So the titles in our mental health bundle we feel are really quite unique and stand out from the standard market offering because we've taken this approach and looked at behaviours a bit more. And that's titles like stigma, mental health, positive self-talk, are not things that we've seen elsewhere, despite being reflective of the state of mental health people around us. So this bit is about outsourcing content. So how do you find the one? So we spent the last, half an hour or so, given technical issues, talking about how valuable content strategy is. So it is really important that if you are going to work with a content partner for those, that 10%, like, who are you going to choose, and actually someone that's aligned with what you're trying to do overall. And this is just, I guess, reinforces why it's important to have a strategy in the first place. Because if you don't, you could find that what your business wants gets conflated with what your learner needs, and you might end up working with someone who doesn't really align with what you're actually trying to do with your content as an overall. So example here is, like, imagine you're procuring a catalogue of 1,000 modules at a reasonable price, but then you have no practical understanding of how this maps to what individual learners actually need. And in reality, it could be an L&D nightmare trying to formulate and piece this content together into meaningful learner journeys. And back to what I was actually saying earlier, is that sometimes too much content can be absolute pain for your end users. So don't just stick stuff in there that isn't actually going to be useful. So at the very least, a bit of advice is to look a bit deeper than the number. So don't be too attracted by the bright lights of, oh, they've got 1,000 modules, that's great. What are those things actually? So questions to ask are things like, what's their approach coming up with titles to the provider? What's your approach coming up with new titles? How do you do that? How do you decide what content you're going to include? Where do you get your content from? So when you're actually, your provider is researching their content, where are they getting that from? How do they go about defining a learner journey to fill a specific content gap? Then practical things as well. How do you get hold of the content? What format is it in, and that sort of stuff. Is it easy for you to actually get access to it? Will it work with the technology? I know that sounds really obvious, but that is something important to check. So these are just some things to think about when you're looking at working with a provider. These are Emma's personal favourites that she's pulled out as well, questions to ask. I
think I might actually have better internet now if you want me to.
Oh, good. I feel like this is a good time for you to come in on, so I feel like I'm really talking for you now, Em.
Yeah, sorry, I think I've just done a restart and it seems to have boosted a little bit.
All right, brilliant. I will gladly pass back over to you then.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, Danny gave a few examples there, but I picked out, I could go on and on, so I kind of picked out a few of my favourite questions to ask if you're looking for a content provider. And the first one of those is, what's the shelf life of a piece of content? And I feel like maybe this isn't an obvious one that comes to mind, but I find it really important, because really what this is about is asking, if we purchase pieces of content, how long will they be relevant for? How quickly will the content and the design date, or how often is it revisited? Will it continue to have value for us? Things like mental health, leadership, etc. continue to change and evolve. So if you buy a piece of content, is that it? Is it always going to stay the same, or is it revisited and made sure that it's kind of in line with modern thinking? The second one, what does the relationship look like? Which is something we think about a lot when we talk about platforms, but not so much when we talk about something like off-the-shelf content. But that's equally as important. Is it transactional? Is it just that you buy the catalogue and then you get on with it and you never really speak to anyone again? Or is it more of a partnership? Like, will they help you on an ongoing basis to understand how that content can be practically used and integrated with your existing learning? Or, for example, used in the stream of work, or when something relevant or topical occurs that you feel like you need to deliver content on. And then number 3, what is it that characterises their content? So, what's important to you? This goes back to your content strategy again. Is it that it's good design, that it's engaging? Is it the format? Do people respond better to video? Is it, for some organisations, being rubber stamped with some sort of regulatory body's seal of approval? Or is it changing behaviours? There's lots of things to think about, and it's all about aligning with your content strategy. So between Danny and I, despite the technical issues, we've kind of talked a lot about some ideas for filling your content gaps, either in-house or with a partner. But how does this all fit together? How do you tie it all together and make sure that it's all part of one ecosystem? I'll hand back over to Danny to close off there.
Just aware of time, I really want to make sure we have time for questions, so I'm going to make this bit fairly quick. I think I talked about this already as well. This is really just about how you then make those routes through your content. So when you're doing your content map, if you can make any relationships between content, then great. That could be grouping it together by topic area. It could be grouping it together by pathway. So, for example, if you're creating onboarding or sales 101 or leadership 101 or whatever it might be, like what are those pieces of content you want to see in there? And it can even be smaller than that as well. So just think about, sometimes you might have a how to submit your expenses video, something really exciting like that. And you might have an expense claim form that you might want to just stick together, sort of couple them together so people can actually find relevant information. I need to think of a better example for that because I always use that one and it's really dumb, but I think quite practical. And then finally, from me anyway, I think it's important to say that you don't necessarily need to have an LXP or a platform in order to do this process. You can do this today. You know, you don't need a wardrobe to organise your clothes necessarily, although it does help. However, if you are fortunate enough to have a LXP or looking for an LXP, I think here are some things to look out for which will really help actually deliver your content strategy. So it's all well and good creating these lovely big spreadsheets and possibly making all the content, but then if you can get a platform that has these things, it can really help. So key stuff like personalization, as I said earlier, last thing you want is thousands and thousands of pieces of content, which ultimately you might end up with, which is not a bad place to be, by the way, because if you have something that can personalize it, people will only see a small amount because it'll be personal. Social learning to give you those UGC tools so you can actually start posting content. Campaigns, again, to make sure you're pushing content specifically to people and promoting content and using your content in a marketing way, which brings back to what Emma was saying earlier. Machine learning goes back to personalization, really. Analytics, like super powerful to see how well your content's doing. So, okay, we've made all this content, we've got this content strategy, but this is back to that continuously changing that. If you're finding that people are really hating a certain format, people are really hating a certain section or series of videos you've created or whatever it might be, then you need to address why that is and actually possibly update them. And if you can connect people together in the platform as well via the content, then brilliant. And that's something we're really passionate about. And I think it's going to be a big change over the next few years. And finally, just to mention that if you do have an LMS as well at the moment that's possibly full of content that you're not sure about, or maybe it's really old and you know haven't looked at it for a while, we do actually offer an LMS to LXP free migration service where you can port everything over. And as part of that, one of the exercises that we would do with you is actually help you create your content strategy by looking at that and seeing what you want to chuck out, what you want to keep, and what you want to update. That's just something that's a bit to thrive. And it's going to finish with another poll with some feedback, really, before we go into Q&A. Cass, did you want to pop the poll up? Thank you. So yeah, will you review your learning content strategy after seeing this talk? Is the question. Hopefully it's given you some practical ideas.
Yeah, so I think we've got about 72% saying yes, absolutely, we're definitely going to update and review our learning content strategy. Absolutely no one saying no, I've got it covered, so that's 0%. And then we've got about 32% saying yes, they're definitely going to review and update some of it. So I think, guys, it's been a successful webinar. I'm going to end the poll now and just share the results so you can see.
Oh, good. That's very nice to see, and despite our technical issues, so thanks for sticking with us.
Yeah, thank you. And if anyone has any questions, now's the time to ask, right, guys?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, I noticed we've already got some.
Yes. So I've got one in here for you at the moment. So Chris is asking, I really like the idea of bite-sized learning, answering specific questions, but I worry about the risk of people losing the wider context whilst trying to keep the content short. How do you suggest managing pieces of learning like this?
So I can probably take that one. So I think you need to think about when they're going to be coming to that piece of learning. So, for example, if you had a piece of very specific learning, like let's use the what's the difference between coaching and mentoring example used earlier, which is very specific. Are they coming to it just in that piece of content, or are they coming to part of a bigger program? So remember, if someone's new to a topic, say I'm new to leadership and I'm a new manager, ideally that piece of content, that very small piece of content, should be delivered via a pathway in the first instance. But then you still have that piece of content where I can get back to it if I want to. So you've got different types at different times. So you've got the pathways really, and the linked content and the more structured programs and the events and all that sort of stuff is for first time users of that content. And then the idea is that people getting back to stuff later because they've forgotten it is less important about the content because context have already gone through it. That's your ideal solution. Now, obviously, there's nothing saying that someone might find that piece of content, just elsewhere. That's absolutely a quote unquote risk. But this is where I think linking content together in your platform can be really, really powerful, because it could be, they'll look at the question, whatever that might be, and then actually you suggested another piece of content underneath that they should look at, or a pathway potentially. If you're interested in this, how about you do this proper program about it to get all the context? That's how I would approach it anyway.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think from the content creation point of view, being short doesn't necessarily mean that you have to lose anything. Sometimes, as Danny said, a few different stages in this webinar, I think a lot of it's about habits, and if we really try and analyze what we're doing and sort of have that strategy and have some sort of goal that we're trying to work towards for a piece of content, then it can be really easy to make things shorter without actually losing any of the meaningful value of it.
Amazing. Thanks, guys. Hopefully, Chris, that answered your question. Next question, this is probably one for Danny. Someone's asking, does Thrive host all the LMS content as an outer beautiful shell, or does it actually replace the LMS where you can do all LMS different actions through it? I think you have a lot of fun answering that one, Danny.
So sorry, just you cut out of it there, Cassie, saying does Thrive do the LMS features as well? Was that sort of the question?
Yeah. So basically, it's not just an outer shell; it actually can fully replace the learning management system.
Absolutely, yes. Yes, so we absolutely can replace the learning management system. And be that one-stop shop for everything. I think that's really important for us. You do get quite often LXPs which are sort of plugins or bolt-ons, and fundamentally they just end up being shiny wrappers a lot of the time. So when we built Thrive, it's very important for us to build everything from scratch in a way that can handle all the machine learning and the personalizations and things like that. And yes, we also wanted to incorporate LMS and LXP in one world, because ultimately, yes, you want to do all this sort of stuff, all the fun stuff, but we have to do some of the boring stuff too. So yeah, Thrive is set up to do both things.
Amazing. I'm just posting a link now into a quick demo so that you can see everything that Thrive can do. So I'll put that in the chat for you, and hopefully that answered your question. On to the next question. We've got a question asking, any advice on deciding whether information should be in the form of a webinar, article, informal blog, etc.? So that's asking more about what formats lend itself to different topics, I assume.
I'm sure me and Ellen both probably got stuff to say on that one. I'll just quickly add my views on that. So I think, in my experience, like if you want a rule of thumb, I often say, like, if it's a hearts and minds piece, if it's a behavioural piece or something we are trying to like convince someone or something, I personally think that videos and animations tend to work better. If it's more skill based, so if it's more practical, like, top tips to do this, or 5 steps, anything steps, processy related, I think infographics and PDFs and things like that work really well. That's how I break it down as a very, very general rule, but obviously it depends on the context. I'm sure Emma's got some more thoughts on that as well.
Yes, my internet seems to be dropping out a bit, so if people can't hear me, then please just move on. So yeah, the one thing I would say about that is just that, if it's something that you want to sort of demonstrate or use a story or an example to bring things to life, then you probably need something a bit more complex to do that. But for things like simple tips or practical kind of elements, we tend to stick to something a bit more simple, like a PDF.
Amazing. Thanks, guys. Another question asked by Paul. How do you monitor or track content if it's still relevant? So again, I think you could probably both add some value to that question in terms of our catalogue process and how we keep that fresh and relevant and engaging. And Danny, from a learning platform point of view.
Yeah, I mean, Em, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. So yeah, in the context of our off-the-shelf catalogue, there's kind of a processy thing around that. So just making sure that we have like a review point in, which we kind of say generally is every 6 months, but also we.
Oh, she dropped out.
Oh, I think you dropped out, Em. Go on, Danny, you take over.
I think what I was saying, we review it every 6 months for our content catalogue. I think my assumption is you're looking at, is this piece of content still relevant?
Right, sort of.
Oh, and she's back.
Oh, sorry. Did I drop out again?
You did, yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Well, I'll let you finish and then I'll pick up afterwards.
Okay, cool. I was just saying, like, I think if you're looking at a piece of content trying to work out if it's still relevant, I usually keep it in the LXP. Hopefully you have some things in the LXP LMS that can help you with that. So I look at things like, when was it last accessed? And obviously how many views and likes and shares and engagements it's got is quite useful as well. Particularly last accessed is really handy. So if you see a piece of content that hasn't been accessed for 2 years, then maybe it's not relevant anymore. Hopefully if you've got a platform that is intelligent enough, when content is like that, it will probably drop down the list and be recommended less as well, just it will drop out your recommendations. But that's what I would look at. And also a little bit what Emma was saying that we do internally, I think having occasional reviews of your content sort of more formally is a really good rule to do as well. So every quarter, say, you might do a bit of a check for certain areas, just as a housekeeping thing.
Yeah. And one thing I was going to add, which I don't think you guys heard, was just about like keeping your finger on the pulse a little bit. So like we have some of our content writers will have like expertise in certain areas, and we try to be the way we work is quite agile, so that we can be quite reactive to things, so that if there's something going on in the world that we think, oh, you know, we could do some content on this, or oh, that changes our perspective about something we've done before, like leadership, then we kind of action it kind of in the moment, so that we're keeping up with that kind of zeitgeist.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's about having visibility over the wider picture, and that's why learning content strategy is so important, isn't it? So when you create a new piece of content, like I know with the catalogue, we don't have any titles that overlap, and everything works together, so that if we create something new, something old might need to be reviewed or anything like that. So I think, yeah, having a content strategy and having that visibility over everything is super important. This is one for you, Em. We've got a question here asking, what platform do we create our content with? They'd love to be able to produce similar quality content to Thrive's catalogue.
Well, the answer to that is kind of both great and like a little bit disappointing for you perhaps, because we actually use our own internal authoring tool. So we developed a tool specifically that we can use for off the shelf, just to give us that kind of simplicity that we craved in terms of our approach. So it's called Lucid, and it's our in-the-house authoring tool. But to be honest, you know, as we've already said, we produce content in such a variety of formats because we're led by the content itself rather than any specific format. So we do have lots of like videos and animations that are just use standard design tools like After Effects, and lots of PDFs, which, you know, are quite, as long as you've kind of got free tools to help you make them look pretty, like Canva, which I know something as Danny uses a lot, are actually quite easy to create. So yeah, a variety of tools, but unfortunately our e-learning is done with our own in-house tool. Makes it unique.
And just on that list of tools, I put it in the chat for everyone. So if you scroll up a little bit, when Danny was talking about it, I added the link to Danny's list of 3 content creation tools. So there's loads in there that you can get stuck into and explore. Okay, so we've probably got time for one more question. We've only got a minute to go. So this is a UGC question here, so it's probably one for you, Danny. Best tips to encourage users to post more user-generated content?
Oh God, I could talk about that for hours.
Your favourite tip?
Favourite tips? I'd say start small. So if you can, start by encouraging users to post things like links and questions. That can be a really good way in. They're quite passive, not really putting themselves out there. Like sharing a TED talk is not, you know, you don't feel like you're being scrutinized for that. That's a good one. And I think my best tip is, if you hear someone around the office or you know someone who gets asked the same question again and again and again, if you say to them, imagine you never have to answer that again, post it on Thrive or whatever your platform might be, and you'll never have to answer it again. That can be a really quick win to get people to make content, and it can just be really quick questions they're putting up and putting up answers. I know that particularly people in tech teams, that goes down really well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Danny. And I think that's the end of today's webinar. We can't leave without telling you about our latest offer that we have going on at the moment. So I will do the commercials for you guys. So until October the 1st, we have a free contract and migration service for any open source LMS users. So that includes things like Tota and Moodle to migrate to Thrive LXP. So the deal is it will cost you nothing, so you can Thrive straight away until your current contract is up for renewal. There's a few more details on the screen there, and I'm just going to post a link in the chat now to anyone who to inquire or read more about the offer that we have on. So yeah, what's left to say is just a big thank you. Thank you to Emma and Danny for joining us. Thank you to everyone who's tuned on today. We will make sure that you will get a copy of the recording. The slides are already on our LinkedIn profile if you want to go check them out. If not, you'll have to wait a couple of days to access the slides and the recording, but you will get them in your inbox. In the meantime, if anyone has any more questions, Danny, do you want to go on to the last slide just so it can show up our phone number and our email address? Any more questions about our free migration service, what Danny and Emma covered today, anything about learning content strategy, we would love to speak to you. So just drop us a message, the details are on the screen. And that's everything. Apologies again for the connection issues.
Sorry, guys.
These things happen, but I think you guys absolutely saved it, so thank you so much. And yeah, big thank you to everyone who joined, and we hope to speak with you all soon.
Thanks everyone.